Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
All right, well, now then, I want to transition into a discussion of, it's one thing to say we want to help people, we want to teach them truth and bring them encouragement, but generally, the problem that I associate at this point is, well, how do we encourage them with truth when we live in a culture that does not believe that there is truth, all right? To me, this is a fundamental question that we need to be willing to look at. This gets into the issue of postmodernism. And we're going to look at it historically, philosophically, to try and help us then, well, then how do we help people? Because that's essentially what we're trying to do, right? Give them truth, but we live in a culture that doesn't believe in truth. One of the best ways I can illustrate how culture thinks in this area, a number of years ago, I was flying back. At the time I was living in Dallas, and I was flying back to Dallas, and I was sitting down. I'll be honest with you, most times I'm just content to put my head up on the window and just fall asleep. This one time, God obviously had some other opportunities for me, and this woman sits down beside me, starts talking and showing me pictures of her grandsons and her dogs and her house and her plants and everything else, and she's just really wanting to talk to me. I'm like, okay, let's start talking. And so inevitably, she asked me, well, what are you doing? And at the time, I was studying at Dallas Seminary, and she's like, oh, are you going to be a priest? I'm like, oh, not really. I'm kind of already a priest according to Hebrews. But nevertheless, start getting into other discussions. And she's like, oh, so what denomination are you from? And I didn't want to get into a discussion of denomination. I just simply said, I'm a Christian. She's like, I know, but what type of Christian are you? I said, and again, not wanting to get into the sectarianism of it, I just said, I'm an evangelical Christian. Soon as I said, I'm an evangelical Christian, this woman's face puckered up like she had just bitten into the sour lemon of the universe. And in disgust, she looks at me and she says, oh, you're one of those. Oh, great, you've heard of us. Wonderful. Yeah, we've come around. This woman was so utterly disgusted. She looks at me and she says, I bet you're one of those Christians who think that Jesus is the only way. You're one of those, aren't you? I said, well, I don't think it's my thinking, but yeah, I do believe the Bible teaches that Jesus is the only way to God. That is so narrow-minded. You're probably one of those Christians who think that your way is the only way and everyone else has it wrong. Buddhists have it wrong, Muslims have it wrong, Hindus have it wrong. Your way is the only way. That's probably what you think, right? And I'm like, well, again, man, I don't think it's what I think. I think it's what the Bible teaches. But yeah, I do believe there is salvation in none other than Jesus Christ. That is so arrogant. I mean, this woman would have kicked me off the plane if she could have, because she was so disgusted with a person that held to such a narrow-minded, arrogant, intolerant worldview. We're in the air at this point. And this is totally by God's grace. As I started thinking and responding to her, I said, ma'am, let me ask you this question. What if all of a sudden the pilot gets up on the PA system, ladies and gentlemen, please put your seats upright, your seats on, your tray is stocked and loaded, and we're about to land. But ladies and gentlemen, I as your pilot just want to inform you that as we're landing, I'm going to try something a little different. Instead of landing the plane down on all wheels and coming down to a soft, smooth stop, I am going to land this plane upside down. So I'm presenting this hypothetical situation to this woman, and the eyes of this woman start getting large. She's like, this is like a few months after 9/11, right? So she's like, there's this crazy terrorist guy who's saying the plane's landing upside down. I'm like, no, I'm not terrorist. I'm just Canadian, all right? And I'm trying to explain to her, I'm just saying, hypothetically, if the pilot came on and said to you and me that he's landing the plane upside down, ma'am, how would you respond? No. No, he cannot do that. I said, ma'am, you're telling me he can't land that plane upside down? No. What about on the right wing? No. Left wing? No. The tail? No. How about the nose? No. I mean, she's going on adamant that there's no. I said, ma'am, are you sure? You're telling me He can't land that plane any other way except on its wheels? That's right. There is no other way to land that plane except its wheels. Ma'am, are you telling me there is one way to land that plane? There's only one way to land that plane. I said, ma'am, that is so narrow-minded. I said, who are you to tell the pilot there's only one way to land that plane? If he's feeling a little creative and wants to land on the wing, the tail, the nose upside down, who are you in your arrogance and intolerance to tell him there's only one? Wait, at this point, I'm smiling. She's smiling. She's like, yeah, I know what you're saying, but you don't understand. If he lands that plane in any other way, he's playing with my life. To which I said, ma'am, if you think there are many ways to know God, that all faiths are genuinely the same, you're playing with your soul. And I would love to stand before you here today and say that woman got saved, we got a bottle of water, and I baptized her, and everyone else on the plane got saved. It didn't. The seed was planted. I shared the gospel with her, but I have no idea where she is or what she did with that truth. But to me, it was a perfect example of how our culture thinks. The idea that you are so arrogant, so narrow-minded for thinking that Jesus is the only way. Now, mind you, this is not just how the outside world thinks. We are finding more and more evangelicals believing the idea is that there are many ways to knowing God. It's just, I like my way. I like the Christian way. But I'm not going to bash the Buddhists or the Hindus and say that they're wrong. I mean, that's just so intolerant. And I got to wonder, how did we get here, right? How did we get to this point? And that's what I wanted to address so as to be able to bring truth to people who don't believe there is such thing as truth. That is the people that are going to be coming to you. They're going to come to you and say, hey, I'm struggling with pornography. Can you help me with that? Well, yeah, pornography's wrong. Who are you to tell me pornography's wrong? Don't judge me. Hey, I'm really struggling with homosexuality. I was wondering, is there anything you can do? Yeah, well, homosexuality is wrong. What? That is so narrow-minded of you to think that way. Who are you to say homosexuality is wrong? Well, your Bible says it, but who's to say that Bible's right? I mean, we are so inundated with this way of thinking. So this is what we're going to try and do, all right? Provide an understanding of postmodern culture, present its fallacies in thinking, and provide basic methods and techniques and help them present truth within this culture. Big fancy way of trying to help people know the truth when they don't believe there is truth. So first off, let me ask you this question. Think about it for a second. Roll it around in your mind. Get your calculators out if you need. Feel free to use hands, fingers, toes, if you need to do higher math. But as you see this question posed before you, the answer is 4. Is everyone pretty much in agreement with that? You're okay with that? You want to think about it for a little bit longer? Okay. Pretty easy, right? Inevitably, most other classes, you guys are so well disciplined. I always get those guys. Usually guys, girls are so much more mature, but I usually get those guys who say, it's 3 or 5 or, it's blue, and they're trying to be funny and just stupid, right? I mean, honestly, trying to get a yuck out of everyone else. But we know none of those answers work. It is not 3 or 5 or blue. You can't go into another discipline of geography and say it's Madagascar. There is one answer to this question, right? 4. One question, one answer. Let me ask you another question. What do you see below?
A target.
Say it again.
A target.
A target.
A guy wearing a sombrero standing on a line.
A guy wearing a sombrero standing on a line.
Plane.
A donut on a table. An airplane.
Cheerio.
A Cheerio. Caitlin's still hungry.
Really fast names.
Some other responses I've had. Sun setting on the ocean. Sunnyside egg with 2 straws. Plane with repeller coming straight at you. Thank you, Nate.
Awesome.
You ready for this? An aerial view of a Mexican riding a bike. Do you see it? It's okay, I'm a minority. I'm allowed to make that joke, okay? So it's okay. But do you see it? Some of you are like, yeah, I don't see it. I'm just laughing, though, because I don't want to look stupid. I'll get it at 2 in the morning, though. Yeah, okay. What I'm trying to prove to you here, is that when you guys saw this image, I got a multiplicity of answers to the one image, right? And this to me is a perfect example of what's happened in our culture. Within our culture, we used to answer questions of morality, ethics, and life in a different way. We used to answer like this. One question, one answer. So let me give you an example. Is abortion wrong? We believe yes. To that question, there's one answer. Yes, abortion is the killing of a human life. Is homosexuality wrong? Yes, it's a perversion of God's created plan of sexuality between a man and a woman in the covenant of marriage. Which religion is the true religion? I know we don't like the word religion, so let me just say, which is the only way to God? Specifically, Jesus Christ himself, the way, the truth, and the life. This is your question of morality, ethics, and life. Here's the answer. We now answer these questions in a very different way, kind of like the picture of what do you see? So when it comes to, is abortion wrong? Well, it's your definition of life, right? You think it starts at conception, you think at 10 weeks, you think at 3 months, you think at delivery. So abortion is wrong for you all times because you think conception, but it's not wrong for you in the first 20 weeks. It's not wrong for you in the first 3 months. And it's not wrong right up until he's born because you all have different views on when life begins. That's okay, right? Who is to say you're right, you're right, you're right, and you're wrong? And come on, we all can't be wrong. I'm sure we're all right to some degree, right? At least that's how we as a culture think. Is homosexuality wrong? No. It's a legitimate alternative lifestyle. We're going to talk about that later this semester because most of the arguments now are changing to where it's not just a matter of choice, it's a matter of biology. The biological arguments for homosexuality are the bedrock now, which is, on the part of thinking, is a brilliant move of marketing. To be able to fight civil rights issues in the area of homosexuality, similar to what the African Americans did in the 60s, it's a brilliant marketing move. It's not attainable in terms of truth, but it's brilliant in terms of marketing. Nevertheless, that's where they go most these days. Which religion is the true religion? God's at the top. Take whatever path you want, right? As long as you're sincere in your faith. All that to say, this idea of postmodernism follows from modernism. And generally speaking, what is modernism? If you were to help someone understand that. You understand post. What does post mean, by the way? After. It's not just cereal brand, right? Post is after modernism. Postmodernism, after modernism. So what is modernism then? That's an honest answer. It was before postmodernism. You're right. Any ideas of what is modernism? I mean, what do you think of when you hear the word modernism?
Wasn't it the factual point where everything had to be based on facts and you
Right.
couldn't see it or touch it or it had to be tangible in some way?
Just to give you an understanding of, well, let's start over here. Since we're going to talk about postmodernism, and here is modernism. What came before modernism? Pre. You guys are brilliant. So over here, there is no truth, right? At least you determine what your truth is. Within modernism, what you were saying was essentially, well, we can examine, we can test, we can observe, right, what truth is. Whereas in pre-modernism, how were things explained? How was truth understood?
By feeling?
It was given.
It was given by who?
God or
Authority?
God, the gods, the authorities such as church, mostly church, witch doctors, shamans. I mean, the religious authorities was the way that truth was communicated. Within a pre-modern way of thinking, how did the sun rise and set every day? In a pre-modern way of thinking.
God would bring it up.
God would get on his chariot and he'd ride from the east to the west, and his wheel was the sun, and he would ride from the top to the bottom. Or in some other religions, it was on the back of a turtle, and it would travel very slowly. That's why turtles are so slow, because they have a big sun on their back. And it would and we hear that, and we're like, crazy pre-modern people. That's not how it happens. How does the sun move? It actually doesn't. What does it do?
It's on the spot and we spin.
We move. And guys like Galileo and Copernicus all of a sudden are looking through their telescopes and doing the math like, wait a second, we're not the center of the universe. We were talking about this in our other class, and at that point, that was heretical, by the way, to change the sudden idea that we are the center of the universe to the idea that we're not the center. I mean, and that's really what it came down to. It's not so much that the sun was the problem, it's that we weren't the center. They didn't like that too much. And it was a heretical concept that Galileo had to either resolve himself and come back on, or be excommunicated and killed for such a heretical thought. But it was through scientific observation that these guys realized, no, we don't actually we are not actually the center. The center is the sun, and we revolve around it. Essentially, guys like this come up with something like the scientific methodology. You guys have all done this in science class, right? You test something, you make some observations, you have your hypothesis, and then your conclusion, but you keep on doing that. And what happened within a modern sense, in a modern world, is that all these notions that we had about trees and animals and man and life in general, that before were attributed to God, the gods, spiritual, we're now realized that it's not really gods, it's just science, right? I mean, before, for instance, if you watched a newscast and there were, you know how sometimes they ask experts in the field on their thoughts about something? Where do they go to find those experts usually? Universities, right? If they're talking about political science, they're going to find a political science professor. If they're talking about biology, they're going to find a biology professor. Whatever it is, they go to a university to find them. Within a modern scope, that makes sense. Who are the experts back here, though? The church, the priests, the religious leaders. If they were doing an interview on CNN, they would go to the church to get the expert opinion, not the university. But that's the perfect way of understanding the difference between the two. Does that make sense? They thought everything was attributed to God, where these guys said, it's not really God that's doing it, it's just science. We can observe it, we can see it. And that's essentially what happens. The scientific method becomes the foundation for all these ways of thinking, to which thankfully there were some wonderful Christian responses. Nevertheless, the problem of modernism started to come out. Sire says as well, some Enlightenment thinkers did not entirely reject belief in God, but replaced Christian theism with deism. Explain deism to me. What is the idea of deism?
Started things spinning and then just
Right.
wasn't involved.
And then just kind of left it going, right? God started it, but he's not personally involved in it, which we as Christians totally deny, especially when you read Colossians 1. God is intimately involved in every atom of our existence. Nevertheless, deism becomes a popular, especially in the writings of some of the early forefathers of this country, Thomas Jefferson being probably the most notable one. It's not that he didn't like the idea of God, it's just given scientific evidence, there seems to be a God who's not really involved in everyday life. He got it going, thanks God, but now it's pretty much just running itself. We went from theism to deism, belief in a creator without revelation or providence or incarnation, but this evisceration of theism naturally led to naturalism. What is naturalism? Sound it out.
Will happen naturally.
Happen naturally through what type of processes? Mostly evolutionary, right? I mean, Darwin comes on the scene. He starts making some observations on this Galapagos Island about some animals, about some differences, about some hereditary differences, and makes certain assumptions and theories on the origin of species. Publishes it, and wow, like wildfire, it catches on within the scientific community. And all of a sudden, it's now the leading theory. Theory. Not so much science, but a theory of how we came into existence. but proposed to be based on scientific evidence, of which we have none, but it's a good idea nevertheless. God readily went from being once removed to being absent entirely. In this scientific methodology, this humanistic manifesto was essentially written to articulate the realization that we don't need God. Humans are the center. We are the center of it all. And this scientific method leads to something like this. Time magazine is famous for a number of covers. This one in 1966, essentially asking the question in bold red lettering, is God dead? Why would people speculate that?
It can't be observed.
I can't see him. I can't smell him. I can't put him in a test tube and make hypotheses about him and therefore make conclusions based on those observations and make some more. I can't prove God, right? So therefore, God's not there. If I can prove everything else, how trees grow, how I digest my food, how blood moves around the body, how wood acts, how electricity moves, I can prove all these other things through scientific methodology. I can't do that with God, so therefore, sorry, God has left the building, right? Now, it would seem a bit of a jump to the logical outworking of modernism to these guys. You probably know the middle guy pretty well, right? Big swastika on his arm probably gives it away more than anything else. Hitler is obviously a tyrant known and associated with probably, conservatively speaking, the death and murder of about 5 million people. 5 to 6 million Jews, and on top of that, countless others, gypsies or mentally ill or handicapped individuals, people that didn't fall into the master plan, right? Anyone know who the guy on the top is? Stalin, all right? Again, conservatively speaking, this guy, probably the worst atrocities ever committed in humanity through this guy. Some people put him anywhere between 20 to 50 million of his own countrymen killed within his regime. 50 million. I mean, I can't even put my head around that number. Anyone know who the guy at the bottom is? No, that's not Kim Jong-il II. Earlier back, we're going back to the 70s, 1970s. Pol Pot. I'm glad you read your notes as well. Good. Does anyone know who Pol Pot is? Khmer Rouge, the killing fields of Cambodia. It's during this time that his Khmer Rouge comes into power, and again, estimates are around 2 to 3 million people, of his own people, that he had eradicated, killed off in concentration camps to bring in his political ideology. Again, I can't even begin to fathom those numbers. We're talking millions here. Let me ask you this question. Has anyone ever come up to you and said, you Christians are such hypocrites? You know how much evil has been perpetrated in the name of Christianity? Has anyone ever brought that to your attention before? Like what? What evils have been done? Crusades, probably the most notable one, right? What else? Spanish Inquisition, Salem witch hunts, all done in the name, hey, we love Jesus, but we're going to burn you up, okay, right? I don't deny that there have been great evils perpetrated in the name of Christian. When someone tells me that, you know what I say to them? You're right. But understand, the evils perpetrated in an atheistic, non-God function have been greater than all of history put together. There have been more evils perpetrated without God's name than in God's name, far and away. And we have the opportunity to help them understand that while, yeah, I'm not excusing the evils done in Christians' name, in Christ's name, the alternative is not any better. In fact, it's a lot worse. We finished off our kind of the main core of counseling discussion. We started getting into the postmodernism discussion, correct? We started going through that, asking very hard questions and getting through all this, trying to essentially get to the idea of why is it or how is it that we can talk to people about truth in the problems they face when they don't believe there is a thing known as truth, an absolute truth at best. We talked about the beginning thoughts of postmodernism, finding its origination in modernism, hence post coming after. And this idea that we can know truth as observed, as seen, as experimented through the scientific methodology and things like that, and eventually came up to the reality that, through the scientific method, we don't need any God anymore. The pre-modern era was everything was explained by God, or gods, right? The authority then were the priests, was the church. If you want to know how life was, CNN's doing an interview on a topic, they go to the church. Compared to the modern era, where the experts are the scientists, the professors, those within the academic world. Unfortunately, what happened to this idea of God being dead was what I refer to as the logical outworking of a modern framework of thinking. The idea that if there's no God, if we can determine truth, if we can understand it, scientifically speaking, fortunately what happened in the 20th century specifically were some of the worst genocides in recorded human history. I mentioned to you last class that often I'll hear people rail against Christianity, saying, you Christians, there's so many evils have been perpetrated in the name of Christianity, to which, unfortunately, I have to agree with them, whether it be Spanish Inquisitions or the Crusades or the Salem witch hunts. Truth is, yes, some terrible evils have been perpetrated in the name of Christ. But I'm quick to point out that those people, Crusaders, the witch hunters, the Inquisition, they were working contrary to the teachings of Christ. Very clearly, they were looking at what Jesus was saying about turning the other cheek or the realities of the Beatitudes or the Sermon on the Mount, whatever it was, and they were working contrary to Jesus and his teaching. Comparatively to these guys who are working in conjunction with their modernistic worldviews. It makes sense for Hitler to eradicate as many Jews as possible. Why? Well, because scientifically speaking, they don't fit into the Aryan model of what should be the master race. It's science. You know what they used to do? They used to take ascertain, like overhead projections, and put it up, and they would make people walk in front of it because they would have a profile of what they believed to be the master race. It was a science called eugenics. And these scientists figured out that certain physical characteristics should be present within the master race. Does anyone know what that master race looks like? Blonde hair, blue eyes. Heidi's feeling okay right now, right? But, sorry, Caitlin, what color eyes do you have? Brown, dark skin, dark hair, pronounced nosed, lower brow. I mean, scientifically, we can show that a master race has these characteristics. So they would walk people in front of this overhead projection, and hopefully their profile would fit. If not, sorry, science says we need to get rid of you. It is logical for these men to do the evils that they did. It makes sense within a communistic regime to eradicate all the non-essentials that are working against communist ideals. It makes sense for Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge to come in and get rid of any of those that may be opposing his extreme militaristic forces. This makes sense. Crusades, Spanish Inquisition, Salem witch hunts don't, given the teachings of Jesus. These do. And so while I do agree that some evils have been perpetrated in the name of Christianity, I'm quick to point out that the evils done in the name of atheism, which mainly these were coming out of fascism, had some connections to religion, but were obviously very far-fetched at best. The reality that modernism had its logical outworkings and the greatest evils perpetrated on human history. Most people understand that what they did, when you bring up these guys, Pol Pot, Stalin, or Hitler, most people don't respond favorably to them, right? I mean, there's some neo-Nazis maybe out there that like him still, but they're the extreme. And most people respond negatively when they see or hear about Hitler or Stalin, because they realize what they represent was evil, right? That then makes the shift to postmodernism. The 20th century saw some of the greatest evils done in the name of science, of the ideas that we had found truth. This is what truth is, and then we saw the effects of it. Unfortunately, this idea of the absolute, objective, and universal is considered implausible because we saw the abuses of it. Does that make sense? 20th century said, we've got truth, we saw great evils from it, and then society at large says, oh, we got to be careful about anyone saying they've got truth. Look what happened before. Now understand, hear me say this, okay? It's not like we all woke up one day and decided as a culture, you know what, I'm kind of bored. Maybe I'm going to go for a run, maybe stop and get a latte. And I know I'm going to be a postmodernist today. It's not like we all woke up and collectively agreed to be postmodern. We as a culture kind of shifted. So, and there's no absolute date on this. If you remember, kind of historically speaking, what I was using as kind of historical markers of pre-modernism, modernism, and postmodernism. Do you remember the historical marker that I gave for the, that's the end of modernism, we'll say, and this is postmodernism. What was the historical marker for the beginning of modernism? Historically speaking? Did we talk about this? Scientifically was, I'm talking about actually a political movement in Europe. The specific nation had lots of guillotines and blood. French Revolution, right? The reason I make that as a specific marker is because it was at this event that all of a sudden there was a major shift from understanding that it's the elite, the religious, the leaders that need to be brought down to equalize everything, right? And the French Revolution was a bloody massacre of killing all those incredibly high-ranking officials, those people that were in the palaces, within the churches and things like that, and became a normalizing standards that you can't consider yourself better. We need to look at it from a different way. And then comes in Enlightenment thinking, the ways of looking at science as the normative fact. This kind of ends, postmodernism begins, and modernism ends at another historical event within the 20th century. Specifically, what we refer to, I'm trying to think of the exact year that it was, but it was a fall of a specific wall. Get it? Fall of a wall? Do you know what wall that was? The Berlin Wall. What did the fall of the Berlin Wall signify?
It was a joining of the two nations between East and West Germany
And why were they separated?
because of Hitler.
Because, well, Hitler, he came in, but then what forces came in and kind of took over East Germany? What country specifically came in and took over East Germany? Soviet Union. Represented by what type of ideology? Communism, right? Communism is a perfect model for modernistic thinking. The ideals of scientific revolution get God out of the picture. We as the people will make the standards of truth. But what happened to communism? It fell, as best exemplified by the falling of the Berlin Wall. Now, there are still pockets, I won't say even pockets, China's obviously still a very strong communist country, but it's a capitalistic economy that's underneath it. You have Cuba, you have other places that still hold on to communist ideals. But in general, the end of the Cold War between Russia and the US and the falling of the Berlin Wall was kind of this shot heard around the world that modernism, the idea of having an absolute truth, doesn't work. Thus came in a postmodern way of thinking, a cultural shift where people said, we need to stop thinking we can get the answers, because when someone thinks they get the answers, really bad things happen. All right? Again, we didn't wake up doing that, but where do you think this type of thinking started? Who are some of the first people that started thinking, oh my goodness, we need to be careful of thinking of absolutes and thinking that there are truth, because look at all the evils that happen. Where do you think those discussions first started? Give me your ideas. Nursery schools, coffee shops, Bible college, colleges in general. If I can just call them academic, all right? The academic world started discussing some of these ideas. And interestingly enough, do you know what field of academics they started talking about this idea of not having absolute truths? Give you a wild guess. Go ahead. You would think it'd be like what? Something like what? Sciences, things, philosophy, and it wasn't in those academic areas. Do you know where it started? Mr. Lange would be very happy. Literature. It started within the academic world of literature. Guys like Derrida and Foucault and guys like that started thinking about how books are written. And okay, now I know it's written this way, but is that really what it means? And they started getting away from the authorial intent of the original authors. And they started realizing, well, in some ways, when you read Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, you can understand these ideas, but when you read Tale of Two Cities, Dickens' ideas come out in a different, and how you read it, and these guys started coming up with the ideas that, well, maybe the readings of these books are not determined upon the author's intent, but more so upon the reader's intent. And what happened from the world of literature in this little way of thinking with Derrida and Foucault and some of these enlightened thinkers within literature started affecting other schools of thought. And the academic world in general starts coming in on this idea that there are no absolutes. So then, if that's where it starts, again, the majority of us don't live in an academic world, right? Where do you think those ideas then went to from there? How do the ideas of the academic world, in fact, I'm going to give you the third answer, okay? This is the everyday people, right? How am I going to say this? The grassroots people. I'll just say people. This is everyday people, you and me, because the average Joe and Josephine on the street thinks this way now, right? But they have no idea this is where it started. So who was the in-between kind of person, people, that got the thinking from the academic ivory towers to the everyday grassroots people on the street? Students who became what? Leaders, teachers, other pastors, or even the in-between, if I can just call them. All of a sudden, these individuals at the high-level academic who are thinking and theorizing that there are no absolutes start making the next generation of leaders which start influencing the everyday people, all right? Generally speaking, that's how a lot of these ideas work. You take my applied theology class, you'll see this in a lot of theological ideas as well. Like something like open theism starts at an academic level, starts getting its way worked down into pastors and other evangelical leaders, and then all of a sudden, people within the church, pews, start believing in something like that. That's usually a progression of a lot of these major philosophical ideas. Interestingly enough, though, this a lot of times takes a lot of time. The pre-modern era, I'm kind of going from recorded history all the way up to 1700s, all right, mid-1700s. It's a long time for a worldview of pre-modernism to exist. If I'm going from the mid-1700s to about, does anyone remember when the Berlin Wall was? I think it was 89, 86, somewhere around there, all right? So generally another 200 years for people to kind of be affected by the academic ways of thinking, to go to leadership, to go to everyday people. That's how most people then thought. If we're talking about the 1980s to now, what do you notice about these timelines? They are progressively getting shorter. The influence of the academic world to the leaders, to the everyday people, progressively gets shorter. My question to you, why?
Information is more available now.
How?
Internet.
Consider the medium by which information is communicated throughout history, right? Back here, if you made a decision within a local church, how did they communicate this to the masses? Really slowly, right? Luckily, they didn't even have moving type back then for most people, right? Much less people being able to read beyond that. I mean, understand the progression of information within this era is very slow. But then this wonderful thing happens here. Gutenberg, yeah. And movable type and print, and the masses are starting to read. And we start realizing the information. And then you go to here. And any Joe or Josephine on their cell phone can get as much information as they want like that. And when these guys start trying to get up ideas and want to transmit it to the masses, it happens relatively quickly. Which makes me realize how important it is that we within the academic or we within leadership, which I assume most of you are wanting to be trained as, you be very careful about what information is being disseminated. because it gets to these people really quick. I just sketched the entire human history for you, by the way. I think that's pretty cool. I just wanted to point that out for you. So, does that make sense, though? Does it somewhat encapsulate what I'm trying to say here of how we got there? Not just so much what we do when we're there, but do you understand, historically speaking, how we got there? Questions with that? Because I know it's a lot of information, historically speaking, yeah.
Do you think that we have the potential for even faster change, or the way we get information now?
Is that the terminal velocity, as it were?
Yeah, exponential.
If history is any indication, it'll get faster. How? I have no idea. And if you come up with that, please let me know, and we'll go into business together, okay? Because that will be the next technology billion-dollar bubble that will burst later as well. But nevertheless, history continues to show that we are a people who progress in terms of the way information is shared. I mean, the Gutenberg press, understand, movable type, while that's not really significant to us, that was a radical invention in its time. The ability to mass produce information on large quantities available for the masses. That was huge. I look at it, I'm like, great, movable type, woohoo. It's because we don't know any better, right? But we see the ways it progresses. How it progresses from here, I don't know. I mean, there are people even talking about nanotechnology as a means of direct human interconnection with the web. I mean, forget actual electronic medium. What if I can put this literally into my head? Okay, I'm on Wikipedia right now. Oh, yeah, look at that. Oh, hey, Joe, how you doing? I'm on, Facebook with them. I mean, some ways of internally, organically meshing technology and organisms together, I'm sure is the next kind of forefront of that. But generally speaking, yeah, we as humans seem to show that historically. So say, yeah, we're probably gonna. Yeah. Any other questions about trying to understand that big picture of history, how we got to where we're at and why we got there? And there's kind of two levels of it, right? There's the historical perspective, and then there's the dissemination of information, top down, left to right. Just how it's happening so much quicker, and why postmodernism, for the average person that you talk to on the street, they'll say there is no absolute truth. Ask them where they got that idea, they'll have no idea. Then you can sound really smart and say, well, in fact, there was Enlightenment thinkings in the writings of Derrida and Foucault, and I can give you some. You can sound really smart, and they'll have no idea. But do they believe that idea that there's no truth? It's the very core of their being, right? How dare you be so intolerant to think there is no other ways? They believe it lock, stock, and barrel and have no idea why. And your opportunity is to help them understand why, and that much more bring truth into their lives, hope into their lives, right? Whatever the issue is. So with that said, the shift to postmodernism, obviously there is a problem. I'm going to fly through some of this so we can kind of get this idea. Give you an example here. This is not a new problem. That's why I put that Genesis passage up there. There's always been a questioning of God and His truth ever since creation. But I found this website as a really good example of what postmodernism is. When The Matrix was out and in its heyday, the website, What is the Matrix? Everyone was on there and discussing what the Matrix is, and it's a really big movie and a great marketing tool. It was one of the first movies that really used the internet as a strong viral marketing tool. It was great. And the Wachowski brothers, the guys who made these movies, would get online themselves. They would have online chats with the fans of the movie. So I get on there one time, and this is not my question, but this was posted by another person on one of these live web chats with the Wachowski brothers. Do you appreciate people dissecting your movie? Do you find it a bit of an honor, or does it annoy you a little, especially when the person may have it all wrong? I can't tell you how many people have theorized about this movie, right? Oh, this means that, and ooh, and Nebuchadnezzar means that, ooh, and Neo means that, and all these different ideas, and people are asking the Wachowski brothers, do you like that, or does it tick you off when they get it wrong? The Wachowski brothers answer, well, there's not necessarily ever an all wrong, because it's about what a person gets out of the movie, what an individual gets out of a movie. So, you guys come over to my house. I've got all 3 movies if you want to do a Matrix trilogy in one night. We put them in, and we're watching them, and the finish of the movie, I'm like, wow, That Neo, he is such a great hero. He is such a good protagonist of this movie. And you look at me with wonder and bewilderment in your eyes and you say, hero? How can you say Nero, or that Nero wasn't a hero, that Neo is the hero? Clearly, Mr. Smith is the hero of the movie. Agent Smith, right? He's the good guy. He's the one that we need. And I look at you, I'm like, dude, what are you on? I mean, he's not the hero, he's the bad guy. And we have this debate back and forth. And hypothetically speaking, the Wachowski brothers are there watching the movie with us because, I hang out with them all the time. And they're there, and we look to them and we say, Wachowski brothers, who's the hero? Is it Neo or Mr. Smith? According to the Wachowski brothers, what would be their answer? You're both right. You want Neo to be the hero? More power to you. You want Agent Smith to be the hero? More power to you. Because neither of you are wrong. It's what you get out of it. It's how you like it. It's how this whole movie is based on the assumption that you get out of it what you want. Yeah, they may have some ideas themselves, but that's not important. Authorial intent is never important in a postmodern way of thinking. The ideas of what the author had are secondary, tertiary at best.
So, in this case, the Wachowski brothers, the ones that made movies, they didn't have an authorial intent. So when people say there's no truth, are they saying God doesn't have an authorial intent?
Well, let me back up a little. It's not that the Wachowski brothers don't have an authorial intent. It's that it's not important what it is for you. They do have an intent, but if you don't agree with it, don't like it, don't see it, that's okay, because it's what you want out of it. So I don't want to assume that they don't have an intent. It's just, do you want to see it or use it? To extrapolate that to God, that's kind of the next step, right? I mean, specifically with God's word. We say that there is authorial intent. When Paul is writing to the Galatians, of first importance, who's he writing to? Oh, brilliant, right? And we need to appreciate the historical, cultural context by which he is writing to them, so as to interpret appropriately and make application 2,000 years later. First to Galatians, then to Matthews, all right? The postmodern thinker says, well, that's one way of looking at it. There may be one interpretation for the Galatians, but the Matthew may be looking at it a different way, and that's okay. We don't have to live by authorial intent when I am the maker of what truth I want to apply to my life. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Even though God intended one thing, doesn't mean that I need to apply that intent to my life. I need to come up. That's a great question. Yeah?
Does it have a lot to do with, like, the richness of a culture? Like, I mean, we live in a rich society, but I mean, the poor people, they, are looking at, okay, they have left their more religious
Sure.
in the poverty. But, and then it's just like all about me and what I want to do.
Yeah. Understand, when I'm presenting to you this whole historical sketch of pre-modern and postmodern ideas, is a big overview because there's a lot of sub-realities to this, one of which is the interaction of culture, society, prevalence of money and resources. I'll give you a perfect example, okay? Okay, I can say this because you're all white. What do white people do, according to most cultural ways of thinking, when they come into a land? Of course, I'm talking generally speaking, but I'll use it as an example. They take over by how? Hi, we're here to make your life better, but if you don't want to, that's okay too. We'll just live in peaceful cohabitation with you, right? Not so much. In fact, it's usually at the end of a spear, a sword, a rifle, a cannon, a missile, that the stronger nations have come in and imposed their cultural ideas and norms upon a weaker culture. And have we seen that before in culture? Yeah, and sometimes we're still seeing it as well, right? I pick on white people because everyone likes to pick on white people. I heard a great quote that white people are the last minority in the world. They can't do or say anything. And I think it to be really unfortunate because it's a huge and gross overgeneralization. Because all cultures have done this at some point. Maybe the one most prolific right now is seen within the white culture, but nevertheless, it doesn't keep them isolated or exclude other cultures as well from the evil atrocities that have been committed. Most definitely, it's culture against culture. And as such, what we've seen is that religion is connected with it, right? The English go into India, and they want to culture them. They got to teach them the word. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, but my last name, Matthew, I think I was telling this to someone earlier, right? My last name is actually Mathai, M-A-T-H-A-I. It's the Indian name. But when my dad went to an English boarding school, this was back in the day when Britain was still the major influence within India, the teachers didn't like that Indian name, so they Anglicized it to a good Christian name of Matthew, because that's what you do. You help people that way, right? Personally, I like Mathai better, but I didn't have much of a choice in the matter. I wasn't around to talk about it. Nevertheless, that's just one small example of how this idea of colonialization comes in. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still some great evils that were perpetrated from one culture to another, but that's one of the big concerns that eventually comes out. The idea of one stronger, more predominant culture coming in and taking over through the force of authority and imposing their standards, mainly religious, upon another. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's how a lot of it does kind of come around. Does that answer your question? Kind of.
I was just thinking more like, I have, I have my own rights, and I don't need authority over me.
Mhm.
To do whatever I think is what I think. Like that kind of thinking comes from more being wealthy and stuff.
From wealth specifically, it's probably encouraged by wealth. Yeah, the idea that if the bottom line is to get the most money, then yeah, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And we're seeing that within our culture now, right? When you look at Enron or Arthur Andersen or Ponzi schemes by these incredible billionaires, I mean, at the end of the day, they want more wealth. And so they're going to fudge a little on the ethics, a lot on the ethics and the standards of truth so as to receive even more wealth. I'll determine what truth is so I can get more money. Yeah, unfortunately, money is the root of many evils. Most definitely. So we go on with this then. It's a problem with postmodernism. I'm going to skip through this. It's a really interesting conversation. If you want to see it at another time, essentially what I did with my youth group one time is we just got online and I wanted to help them practice apologetics, how to actually do apologetics with people. And one very non-evasive way of doing that is online. Just find people to chat with online, and it's a lot less intimidating so as to let them practice on how do you speak truth to people. So they usually don't try and track you down or anything like that. So if you're ever looking for a way, I did this with my youth group. I actually set up a computer with a screen and actually said, okay, this is what they're saying. What should I say back? And they would tell me this, that, the other, and we'd respond back. And we had this phenomenal conversation online with this guy who, it was through instant message, AOL, and you can find little subgroups within AOL to be part of, and this was a religion one, specifically of atheists, which I know they don't like to be called religious, but kind of hard to classify them anywhere else. Nevertheless, this was this conversation that I had with him, and again, I'm going to fly through it right now. The gist of the conversation was that he determines truth himself. One, by what he sees and hears and experiments with, which is a very modernistic way of thinking, but two, how he himself experiences things, which is a very postmodern way of thinking. What came out to be a discussion was really interesting because eventually he said the way he becomes an atheist, that he became an atheist, he takes the Bible, which defines who God is and what God is like and how he acts. He takes that definition and he says, therefore, there is no God. Which I had the exact same response of, what? You're taking a book that believes in God, taking its definition, and therefore saying, kind of arbitrarily, there is no God. I said it's like taking an onion. My example to him was taking an onion, a piece of it away from the onion, and with the piece of the onion in your hand saying, there are no onions. There are no onions. Problematic, why? I'm holding a stinky, smelly onion, right? It's kind of hard to make this argument. There are no blue markers. There are no blue markers. And I can say it really loud and with a lot of sincerity and veins bulging. And But at the end of the day, how will you help me see the illogical nature of my argument? How do you state there are no blue markers when you're using a blue marker to make your assertion? And what I find so fascinating about postmodernism in general, that's essentially where a lot of it falls down, right upon itself. There are no absolutes. Are you pretty sure about that absolute statement you just made, that there are no absolutes? Oh, it is so wrong for you to think there is right and wrong. Are you sure you're right about that statement, that there are no right and wrongs, and that I'm wrong to think there are right and wrongs? I mean, time and time again, these arguments fall right on themselves because they use the very thing to defend the very thing they're against. Nevertheless, postmodernism is a very popular way of thinking, not just with the Joe and Josephine Pagan, but with Fred and Sally Christian. I don't know who they are, but they think this way, all right? Average Christians, 1 in 10 believe the Bible is not accurate. 1 in 4 don't acknowledge the existence of the Holy Spirit. 1 in 3 don't acknowledge the existence of saints. 1 in 2 believe that truth is. Guys, realize this. The majority of people that you will work with in your ministries, youth groups, adult ministries, women's ministries, prison ministries, children's ministries, whatever God puts into your life, the majority of Christians are thinking that truth is relative. Christians are thinking this way. This is not just out there. So we need to be that much more prepared of how to address the ways that they're already thinking and let them know that there is a truth so as to bring truth, whatever the issue may be. Depression, anxiety, eating disorders, pornography, whatever it is, right? We need to help them think through that even more. So then, how do we do this? How do we effectively challenge our culture with the truth when they are skeptical and suspicious of any, should say, claims of truth underneath there? So some things to keep in mind. 1, live with integrity. And this is going to blow you away. You ready for this? This is going to blow your socks off. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12, comes before 1 Peter chapter 3. That's just blowing your mind as I said it, right? You're like, wow, numbers, they go in order. How wonderful. Not only am I referencing the numbers, but I'm actually referencing what it's saying. Keep your behavior excellent, because when you do, something happens. What are they doing here? You're defending. Why are you defending? Because they will come asking questions. And then you will be ready to always give a defense for the reason and the hope that is within you. One has to come before the other. That's why I love how Peter puts this out. He says your lives need to be of such great character that Gentiles look at you, unbelievers see your life and say, why? Why do you do that? What are you doing? How is it that? And then you can say, well, let me tell you. I would love to give you a reason for the hope that is within me. But it's predicated upon the reality of a life, which is why I think it's so important that we're not just disseminating ideas here. Any person can get on a computer and get as much information as they want. The joy of counseling is you get to give information that's impacted your life with the hopes of impacting others. If it's just information, tell them to go to a website. But it's not just information. It's truth that's hit you to hit others, right? It's an effect in your life to help others as well. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business so that you may behave properly towards outsiders and not be in need. Explore doubt. Now, I say this with the example of someone like Thomas. What do we reference Thomas as? The doubting Thomas. Which personally, I think is a bum rap for the guy. Because let's be honest, first, all the disciples doubted at some point, right? Women come back from the tomb. Hey, he's risen, he's not there. Right, sure, cuckoo, lady's gone off the deep end, right? They all doubted the resurrection. And what I find very upsetting is that we never do this with anyone else, right? We don't call Peter, denying Peter, right? We don't call Judas betraying Judas, which is even worse. We don't go around in the church saying, oh, hey, there's adulterous Fred. Oh, hey, lying Sally, how you doing? I mean, we don't categorize people by their sins, but this brother, who is a brother, I think we will see him in heaven, is forever conditioned with the name Doubting Thomas, which for Jesus was not really a big issue. Now, hear me when I say this. First, I do think it to be helpful because we live in a culture which is automatically skeptical. Their knee-jerk reaction to you asserting truth is what? Say it again. There is no. You come here and say, hey, I'd love to share you the truth of Jesus. And they say, there is no truth. They're already skeptical. They're already doubting what you're saying. To which instead, I think we as Christians say, oh, I'll tell you the truth. I will give you the truth and you will like it and I will shove it down your throat and you will love Jesus. To which, why is that not usually a great way of addressing their doubt?
You're not showing them, you're just saying them.
At the end of the day, I just want to win an argument, right? And I forget that I am dealing with an eternal soul. I will be honest with you. I love arguments. I love debating. I love thinking through issues and the tension of getting at somebody and winning. And I realize I've got to beat that down sometimes because at the end of the day, it's not about winning an argument. It's about the glory of Christ in the life of a person. And if all I'm doing is trying to shove down the truth and not even let them question, let me ask you this question. How many of you, by raising of your hands, got saved the very first time you heard the gospel? No one. Bunch of doubters. You're telling me that you heard the gospel maybe once, twice, 50, 100, 500 times? I got saved when I was 14. Born and raised in a Christian home, Awana, Sunday school camps, I heard the gospel tons of times. But it took some time for the word to settle into my heart, for the Spirit to bring conviction, and for salvation to come through. And I realized that when someone you're working with is doubting a little the truth that you're presenting to them, instead of responding in hostility and saying, how dare you doubt truth, be willing to walk with them a little. Engage them a little. Okay, let me ask you, what don't you like about this? Oh, that's an interesting idea. Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. Because our intent is always just to get to the end product, right? Without realizing God loves using the process as much as he likes getting to the product. We're going to get to that point later here. Realize it's okay to walk with the verse. And when Thomas doubted, unless I see his hands and unless I see his side, can you imagine the scene when Jesus arrived back in the upper room the next day? Doors are locked, Jesus appears. They're like, oh, he's back. What do you think Thomas was feeling at that moment? I know we don't have it in the text, but what do you think he's feeling? Maybe he doesn't see me. I just doubted him the other day. And in my opinion, Jesus has every right to go up to Thomas and say, so I heard you doubted me, huh? Well, you're done. I ain't using you. I only use disciples who love me. Na-na-na-na-boo-boo, right? He doesn't do that, though. He engages him with truth. He says, Thomas, you need some proof? Here you go. Reach here, see my hand. Reach here and here, feel my side. And when he is engaged with truth, instead of dismissing him, he engages him, and look at Thomas's response. Be not unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas replies, my Lord, my God. Which, by the way, is a great passage for the deity of Christ. Should your Jehovah's Witnesses ever wonder. This is a great passage to show that Jesus is fully God when Thomas responds that way. Nevertheless, the idea of engaging doubt is a good thing. The other side of this, I realize, is something we need to address as well, because I don't want to give you the idea that doubt is a virtue, which postmodernism has done within our culture, specifically seen within the church and the writings of the emergent writers. Brian McLaren, and others that eventually say, well, we can't really know the truth. In fact, it's better just to wonder and to doubt than to settle on truth. To which I say, hogwash. Hogwarts, if you like Harry Potter. But nevertheless, that is bogus. The idea that we cannot know truth and therefore need to settle in the mystery of doubt as an authentic way of living the Christian life is against the Word of God and is not going to help your counseling. I don't want to give the idea that while I do appreciate people willing to question and to struggle and to doubt, I don't want them to live in the doubt. The doubt is a good catalyst to knowing truth. What does catalyst mean, by the way?
Hold together.
Pardon me?
Bring together, hold together.
It starts the mindset.
More so the starting of a process. When I want a catalyst, I want some type of thing to happen, right? Doubt is a good thing to let truth be the settling item. It's a starting point, but it's not an ending point, all right? And I'm going to let you read through these quotes when you get a chance yourself, and I'll give you some of these later as well. All I'm trying to say is that doubt is not the place to live. And we've bought into that unfortunate reality. These quotes are from a book by Rob Bell titled Velvet Elvis, which has some good thoughts in it. Don't get me wrong, he does bring up some good ideals, but more dangerous and harmful than helpful in my opinion. This idea that mystery is the truth. Mystery is the truth. Everything else is fake. You can't really know truth, so therefore settle on mystery, which I find to be a very truth-laden statement, by the way. Nevertheless, this is what postmodern Christian writers are advocating within our churches. This book is a huge seller, still is. And to me, this idea that you can't know truth is very helpful. It's very harmful. Comparatively to what Scripture says, that you can know, that you can be sure of a hope, that you can know, you can know, you can know. Now, that does not mean you can know exhaustively, all right? It does not mean you are omniscient. But there are some things that you can know for certainty, namely who Jesus is, your salvation, the nature of truth. Are you going to know it all? No, but there are some things you better know because you're held accountable to it before God on the judgment day. And we need to help people understand this idea. Again, for lack of time, I can't go through all these quotes, but these are great quotes. Anyone ever read G.K. Chesterton, Orthodoxy? Oh, I will pray you get this on your library shelves soon, because this is a wonderful book written over 100 years ago, and he's able to identify some of the problems within his culture and where it will go if it continues. And this man was somewhat a prophet. Not in the biblical sense, but he just had a lot of insight, in my opinion. Because he saw that if we continue on this course of relegating truth to personal preference, he said at one point, he says, we will grow up a generation of men who are too shy to believe in the multiplication table. Oh no, I don't want to believe 2 times 2 is 4. That's a little too authentic and absolute for me. No, it is truth. We need to joyfully rejoice that there is a truth. Again, McLaren's quotes that become this quote by Carson, essentially he's trying to give across the idea that we can't know it all, but we can know some, and we're held accountable to what we can know. The ideas of who God is. Another point is to engage spirituality. First off, any questions with the doubt? That I do want you to be willing to let people ask questions, but I don't want them to live in questions. That's the tension that you need to have with that in a postmodern context. Any questions with that? Clear as mud. Love it. All right. Well, then engaging spirituality, put all those up quick because these are all what? These are all TV shows. And I use it specifically as a medium of television is trying to be very cutting edge because our culture loves spirituality. This was not always the case in our culture. We shunned the desire to talk about ghosts or spirits or the occult. Now media realizes people are into spirituality, and so why not make billions of dollars off it by giving TV shows that give that? Now, there is an unfortunate reality with this. What common thing? Okay, let me ask first in terms of the Christian-like shows. Seventh Heaven. These are some older ones. Revelations, Book of Daniel, Joan of Arcadia. Has anyone ever heard of Joan of Arcadia? CBS show. She talks to God, who comes to her in different ways, and she has to do these things, kind of like Joan of Arc. Joan of Arcadia. Anyway, They look kind of Christianese kind of shows, what's the problem generally with those shows? Fluff. They'll never mention the work and person of Jesus Christ. Never. Will they talk about God? Sure, because God's really cool. And your God may be like your God, but maybe different than your God and your God. But they'll never explicitly say the work or the person of Jesus Christ. The Christian shows like Seventh Heaven or Joan of Arc are very fluff. What's the other extreme opposite of the Christian-like shows?
Witches and ghosts and
Occult, right? Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Revelation, Ghost Whisperer, Medium, Charmed are all, but what do you see about those shows? I mean, think about the characters, the people.
They're good, they're heroes.
They're good. They're good looking. They're nice. Yeah, I know she's a witch, but she's a nice witch, right? And they portray the occult within this very, oh, it's okay, they're the good person, they're the nice person, they're the good-looking person, not realizing that it is death to get involved in the occult, right? And so while there is an engagement with spirituality, the ways that I want to use it is what I refer to as a foot-in-the-door conversation. People you work with and minister with are watching these shows, guys. So why not talk about them, right? Why not engage people and ask them, hey, did you see that show of Joan Arcadia the other day? Yeah, wasn't that so great? Yeah, what did you think about that idea of her talking to God who turned up to be like a janitor talking to her that day? Well, I don't know about that. And all of a sudden, you're talking about spiritual realities and hopefully getting to the truth in spiritual realities. All I'm saying is that spirituality is cool again. Why not use it? Why not actually engage it for the help of people? This idea, again, that we don't want to just give them another option of Christianity as another part of spirituality, but actually give them the truth of God's Word. All right? And lastly, present the person of truth, namely Jesus Christ. Truth is not just information where we want to win an argument. Ultimately, we want them to know the person of Christ and for Him to be honored in whatever it is that we're doing. All right? There are some potentials. We live in a culture that does not believe there is an absolute. So actually living an authentic life whereby you can present truth, engaging in doubt, letting them ask questions and walking with them in the process, willing to engage the spirituality, even though it's fluff or occult, it's a foot in the door, and the opportunity to present person of Christ and his life and ministry. That is at least one way that you can have an opportunity to now minister the truth that we're going to be talking about the rest of the semester.